Welcome to the Room to Bloom podcast, equipping you to live redefined, renewed, and restored. I'm your host, Julie Rebboah. Let's tackle this week's topic. Welcome back to another episode of the Room to Bloom podcast. Today I have a very special guest named Terry Tucker, and he's going to talk to us about how we can live our best lives. And so some of the topics might include how to control your mind, how to embrace and grow through pain, and leave an impactful legacy. So welcome, Terry. Thanks for being with us today.
Julie, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you.
Well, I'm so glad you're here. So let's learn a little bit more about you. What's your story?
What's my story? Grew up on the south side of Chicago. You know, I am the oldest of three boys. You can't tell this from looking at me or from my voice, but I'm 6'8" tall and actually went to college on a basketball scholarship despite having 3 knee surgeries in high school. When I graduated from college, I moved home to find a job. I'm really going to date myself now, but this was long before the internet was available to help people find employment. That first job I found in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain, in their marketing department, that was the good news. The bad news was I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mother care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. After I stopped Wendy's, I actually went to work for the hospital that cared for my father and my grandmother. Then I made the major pivot in my life and became a police officer. Part of what I did during that time was I was a SWAT hostage negotiator. After that, I started a school security consulting business, coached girls high school basketball. But for the last 12 years now, I've been battling a rare form of cancer, a rare form of melanoma. And then I guess just finally, my wife and I have been married for 31 years. We have one child, a daughter, who's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and is an officer in the new branch of the military, the Space Force.
Wow. Well, congratulations to you and your family.
Thank you.
So what was your inspiration for writing your book, Sustainable Excellence, 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life?
Yeah, never wanted to write a book, never expected to write a book in my life. You know, there's kind of an old joke that says when we talk to God, it's called prayer. When God talks to us, it's called schizophrenia. So God never talked to me, but I think what God did was put enough people in my path that kept saying the same thing over and over and over again. You should write a book. You should write a book. You should write a book. And I mean, that's the great thing about free will. You know, I mean, we're free to say, no, God, I don't want to write a book. I want to go over here and do my own thing. But I think I'm smart enough, because I'm old enough, to realize that when these things present themselves, that I need to kind of buck up, so to speak, and, you know, pay attention to what's going on. And that's really what happened. Like I said, never wanted to write a book, but all these people were making that suggestion. Sustainable excellence is really a book born out of 2 conversations I had. One was with a former player that I had coached in high school who had moved to the area in Colorado where my wife and I live with her fiance, and the 4 of us had dinner one night. And I remember saying to her after dinner that I was excited that she was living close and I could watch her find and live her purpose. And Julie, she got real quiet for a while. And then she looked at me and she said, well, Coach, what do you think my purpose is? I said, I have absolutely no idea what your purpose is. That's what your life should be about. Finding the reason you were put on the face of this earth. And there is a reason, using your unique gifts and talents and living that reason. And then the other story is about a young man who reached out to me from college and he said, what do you think are the most important things I should learn, not to just be successful in my job or in business, but to be successful in life? I didn't want to give him the, you know, get up early, work hard, help. I didn't want to give him sort of the cliches that we already know. So I spent some time thinking about it, taking some notes, kind of had these 10 thoughts, these 10 ideas, these 10 principles. And so I sent them to him. And then after I had my leg amputated in 2020, while I was healing, I sat down at the computer and I built stories, and they're real stories about real people underneath each of the 10 principles. And that's how sustainable excellence came to be.
Well, we're going to be blessed by your obedience today because we want to learn about these 10 principles, especially because a lot of people can find, reasons not to step into their passion and purpose, or they might not really have enough self awareness to what their gifts and talents might be. And sometimes there are blocks that can keep us from moving into that. And so I suppose that's the first question I want to ask you. What are some of the biggest and most common blocks that people find in their lives that keep them from reaching their potential and from living their best life?
I think one of the biggest, if not the biggest, is fear. And I know I've done this. As a matter of fact, one of the chapters in the book I titled "Most People Think with Their Fears and Their Insecurities Instead of Using Their Minds." And I know I've done that in my life. I'm not proud of it, but I know that I have done that, where I wanted to do something or start something. It's like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe I'm not smart enough. Maybe I don't have enough knowledge. Maybe, what are people going to say about me if I fail? That's thinking with our fears and our insecurities. That's not thinking with our minds. And I always tell, especially young people, if I get an opportunity to speak to a group of young people, I always tell them, if there's something in your heart, something in your soul that you believe you're supposed to do, but it scares you, go ahead and do it. Because at the end of your life, the things that you're going to regret are not going to be the things that you did. They're going to be those things that you didn't do. And then it's going to be too late to go back and do them. And I'll end with this. I heard a man by the name of Jeff Wetzler describe life this way. And probably like you, I've spent a lot of times in my life where, okay, this year I'm going to do these three things. I've got these three goals. I don't set goals anymore. I look at processes. Are my processes in line with God? Are my processes in line with my family? If they're not, then I've got to get them in line. But Wetzler talked about looking at our life in terms of decades, not in just individual years. And he said, in your 20s, you should do everything that is interesting to you. Get out there, try things, make mistakes, make blunders, not for the sake of making mistakes, but for the sake of learning. And then he said, in your 30s, look at it as, what are the 2 or 3 things that I'm called by God to be doing during that time? And then he said, in your 40s, find that one thing. Find that one thing in your heart, in your soul, that God's saying, hey, this is your time. This is your time to do this for me. And then he said, in your 50s and your 60s, you can reap the benefits. You can reap the rewards of doing those things in your 20s, 30s, and 40s.
Wow, so much information there. That's great. So align your thinking with your processes, align with God and your family. That's really important. But you also said that fear is one of the biggest obstacles. So do you have any suggestions of ways that people can start to overcome their fears?
Yeah. I mean, and I'm going to tell you a story because I think the story illustrates it better than me kind of telling you a theory or something like that. There's a man by the name of Jesse Itzler, and he was part owner of the Atlanta Hawks in the National Basketball Association. And he's married to a woman by the name of Sarah Blakely. And Sarah Blakely is the founder of a woman's undergarment company called Spanx. And he tells the story that when she started Spanx at $5,000 and one prototype. And he said, if she would have waited until she knew how to do the marketing, how to do the HR, how to do the distribution, how to do the production, he said, I guarantee you somebody else would have taken that idea and run with it. And I think the important thing about that is that we're all afraid. And don't worry about that. Just jump in. Figure it out as you go along. A lot of times I think we feel that failure is something we can't do. I can promise you that success of any kind the road to that is paved with failure. You have to mess up. You have to make mistakes, not for the sake, again, of making mistakes, but for the sake of learning about the things you need to know. So I know you're afraid. Just jump in. Don't put your toe in the water. Jump in, figure it out as you go along. And the last thing I'll say about this is a lot of times we think that life starts at the end of the rainbow or at the top of the mountain. Life is all the stuff in between starting and getting to the top of the mountain or the end of the rainbow.
Yeah, such wisdom in there. Oh, so many good points that you pulled out about do it anyway, that you're not going to be successful without some failures. And that's true. And also, like the example that you said with Sarah Blakely, just diving in, even if you don't have all of the answers yet, and exploring and figuring it out along the way. Because we all are created with individual gifts and talents, and we're all pieces of somebody else's puzzle. And so when we don't dive in, then we're not filling in the holes and the gaps in this world, which we were created to fill. So many great things. But what are the four truths? When we were talking before, you said that there are four truths. What are those?
Yeah, I have a mirror and a post-it note. So I see them multiple times during the day and they constantly get reinforced in my mind. The first one is control your mind or your mind is going to control you. The second one is embrace the pain and the difficulty that we all experience in life and use that pain and difficulty to make you a stronger and more resilient individual. The third truth I look at kind of as a legacy type of truth, and it's this: what you leave behind is what you weave in the hearts of other people. And then the fourth one I think is pretty self-explanatory. As long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. And I talk about those four truths sort of as the bedrock of my soul. I just think they're a good place to try to start to build a quality life.
Yeah, and there's so much, like they sound so simple, but they really encompass a lot of things. And especially what you leave behind. That's such an important thing because as we live, I think we need to keep our legacy in mind. What are we leaving behind for future generations? What is the impact that our lives are going to have on others? Because that's so much more important than many other things that we might consider to be priorities.
Great.
So how can somebody begin to control their minds? Because a lot of times when fear's running around, we've got all these thoughts keep coming back. We get nervous, anxious, sad. How can we overcome that?
I guess the one of the most important things to understand, and I didn't realize this until I started to research it, was that according to the National Science Foundation, 80% of our thoughts are negative. And that's done more as a survival mechanism as we developed as human beings over time. For example, if you got up this morning and said, okay, you know what? I'm going to go skydiving today. Julie, your brain would immediately be like, oh, wait a minute, Julie. Hey, the plane may crash or your parachute may not know, but that's your brain kicking in to survival mode. Like, don't do that because something bad might happen to you. And the interesting thing, so the Cleveland Clinic has done all kinds of brain research, and they came out and said that 60 to 70,000 thoughts pass through our minds every single day. And 95% of those thoughts are thoughts from either yesterday or the day before. They're not new thoughts, they're repetitive thoughts. About 3,500 new thoughts pass through our minds every single day, and our minds operate at a speed of about 300 miles an hour. Now, I can't possibly think, I mean, I talk fast and I talk a lot, but I don't talk that fast. I don't talk that much. So understand that you've got all these things going on, but given all that, your mind can still only hold one thought at a time. Why would you want to make that a negative thought? And I talked about the chapter in my book about people that get to the point where they're thinking with fear and they're thinking with insecurity. And when I was growing up in Chicago, there was a basketball coach at Indiana University by the name of Bobby Knight, and one of the best college basketball coaches of all time. And Knight had a saying that went like this: mental is to physical as 4 is to 1. So here was this great coach teaching premier athletes to use their bodies to be excellent players on the court. But what he was really saying with that quote is that your mind or your mindset is 4 times more important to your overall success than anything that your physical body is going to do.
That's incredible. A 4-to-1 ratio. Wow. And even though 80% of our thoughts that run through our minds are negative, but that our brains can only hold one thought at a time. And so we can overcome that with positive thoughts. So yes, it is a mind game, isn't it?
It really is. When I was in college, I went to a military college called the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina. And one year we had a president by the name of James Stockdale. And he had been an admiral in the Navy. He had retired, but he'd also been a fighter pilot during the Vietnam War. And he was shot down and spent 8 years in captivity. Now, I didn't spend a lot of time around him. He was the president of the college. I was just a cadet. I remember being at an event where somebody asked him, who were the people that survived that ugliness, that brutality, and that torture? And he said, well, let me tell you who didn't survive. He said it wasn't the big, strong, tough guys who thought that they could handle any kind of abuse or torture. And this second one really surprised him. He said the other group that didn't survive were the optimists. He said these were the people that thought they would be rescued or let go by Thanksgiving or Christmas or Easter. And he said Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter would come and go, and they wouldn't be released. And he said those people died of a broken heart. He said the people that did survive were the people who understood what they could control, which according to Stockdale was basically the breathing in our lungs and the thoughts in our minds. Everything else was at the discretion of the enemy, and controlled that. And I think that's where people get in trouble, Julie. They try to control things that are outside their purview. And I know I've done this. And when I get into that situation, what I do is I take a piece of paper and I write down everything that's bothering me and everything that's stressing me out. And then once you have that list, go through it and cross out everything that you have no control over. And then concentrate on the things that you can control. We spend a lot of time worrying about things that are totally outside our purview. That's God's responsibility. That's not ours.
Such great advice, and what a powerful exercise. So I hope that anybody who is stuck in the mode of worrying will use that and implement that. That's so great. So now, what tips do you have for someone to begin embracing their pain, and why is this important? And I know this is a tough one because a lot of people try to avoid pain.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And that's because our brains are hardwired to do that. We don't like pain and discomfort. We like pleasure. And so the problem is, to the brain, the status quo, the way things are right now, hey, it's comfortable and familiar. Just leave it alone. The problem with that is the only way you're going to grow, the only way you're going to get better, the only way you're going to improve is to step outside those comfort zones and do things that make you uncomfortable. My players, when I was coaching high school basketball, will absolutely tell you that I used to always tell them that they needed to learn to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. So we're all going to experience pain in our lives. And it doesn't have to be cancer pain or anything like that. It could be as simple as you break up with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, or the flight you're leaving on to go on vacation gets canceled, or someone else at work gets the job that you think you deserve. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Suffering is what you do with that pain. Do you use it to make you stronger and more resilient, or do you wallow in it and feel sorry for yourself? The writer Ernest Hemingway had one of the greatest quotes that I ever heard. And this is what he said: life breaks everybody, and afterward, many are stronger at the broken places. And I know that's happened in my life. I mean, life has beat me to my knees many times, and you get to a point where I don't think I can go on. You can't by yourself. You need faith. You need something that's bigger than yourself. And for me, that certainly has been the relationship I have with Jesus Christ. But what I recommend to people, and I do this every day in my life, do one thing every day that scares you, that makes you nervous, that makes you uncomfortable, that's potentially embarrassing. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but if you do those small things every day, when the big disasters in life hit us, and they hit all of us, we lose somebody who's close to us, we unexpectedly get let go from our job, we find out we have a chronic or a terminal illness, you will be so much more resilient to handle that pain when it presents itself.
So that strategy sounds like training. like what athletes would do, training yourself to get used to being a little bit uncomfortable so that when more is required of you, when a bigger circumstance comes, you're prepared mentally, emotionally, physically for that situation.
That's exactly it. And like I say, it doesn't have to be anything big. For example, the other day, I can't stand going to the dentist. I hope your family's not in the dental business in any way, but
I don't like it either, Terry.
but you pick up the phone and you call and you make your 6-month appointment. Okay, that's not a big deal. When you don't like the dentist as much as I do, it is a big
Mhm.
deal. So it's not, you don't have to go out and, dodge traffic or anything like that, to keep yourself in that situation. Just do things you don't like. I mean, I do cold therapy now when I take a shower. I turn the water as cold as I possibly can, and I let that run over me for a couple of minutes. I don't like it. It's uncomfortable, but it's a way of training myself. It's a way of training my mind to deal with uncomfortable things in your life.
So it also sounds like doing uncomfortable things that are healthy for you. For example, the cold plunge or making the dentist appointment, or maybe even for some people that would be making an appointment with a mental health professional. That
Absolutely.
might be really scary, but something also very beneficial. So, yeah, those are great tips too. So, I want to ask you another question, and that is how can someone begin to determine what kind of legacy they want to leave, and how can they live a life that will actually leave a legacy?
That's a great question. And I think the best way to answer that is with a story. Most of us know about or have heard of or seen Fred Rogers. Mr. Rogers on his television show, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, educated so many young people, including me, on all kinds of different facets of life. When Mr. Rogers died in 2003, and I can't believe it's been that long, his family was going through his effects and they found his wallet. And inside his wallet was a scrap piece of paper on which Mr. Rogers had written 4 simple words: life is for service. And I absolutely love that. The relationships, the connections that we have with each other. One of my nurses who cares for me when I get treated for the tumors that I still have in my lungs used to be a hospice nurse. And for those of your audience who don't know about hospice, it's people who care for others at the end of their life. And she gave me a book to read, and it was called Imagine Heaven. And it was a book about people who had had near-death experiences in their life. And there are a lot of interesting things in it, but one of the main things I pulled out of that was no matter who these people saw during their near-death experience, whether it was, Jesus or an angel or a saint or a friend or a relative, the one question that almost everybody got asked was, how do you treat my people? In other words, Jesus was asked, what's the most important commandment? Have no other gods but me, love your God above everything else. And the second was just like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And I think that's what that question was about. It wasn't, did you cheat on your spouse or did you embezzle from your company or did you steal from your neighbor? Not that you should do those things. You should not. But what people were asked is, how do you treat each other? How do we take care of each other? And how do you leave a legacy? That's how you leave a legacy. You care for other people. You make a positive dent in their lives.
Well, I love that because I've always seen life as service as well, and no matter what realm it's in. So as a parent, you're serving and you're raising your children, and in your profession, you're serving your clients, or your pupils or whatever field that you're in. But everything that we do has an impact on other people. Even when we go to the grocery store and we're interacting with the person who's checking us out, how can we serve that people? And often it's just by being kind and not being upset that, they accidentally rung us up for 2 things instead of 1. And so now, let's say somebody's pressing ahead and it's been really a struggle. It hasn't been easy for them. How would you encourage them not to quit?
Yeah, as long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. I think this is self-explanatory, but the way it resonates with me is this. Someday my pain in life is going to end. It may end through surgery. It may end through some type of new medication coming available. Quite frankly, it may end when I die. But if I quit, if I give up, if I give in to pain, then pain will always be a part of my life. There's a true story happened back in the 1950s at Johns Hopkins University. And it was a professor who was doing an experiment with rats. And as soon as I say that, everybody gets all freaked out. So just hang with me. I promise it's a good story. So he took rats and he put them in a tank of water that was over their head. And he wanted to see how long the average rat could tread water. And the average rat treaded water for about 15 minutes. And just as those rats were getting ready to sink and drown, he reached in, grabbed them, pulled them out, dried them off, and let them rest for a while. And they took the exact same rats and put them back in the exact same tank of water. And the second time around, on average, those rats treaded water for 60 hours. Now think about that. 15 minutes, it's not like you're going to flunk a test or your business is going to go under. You're going to die. Your life is going to be over. And the second time around, 60 hours, which taught me two things. Number one, the importance of hope in our lives. That if we know we're doing the right thing, if we know we're in line with what God wants us to do, maybe not today, maybe not this month, maybe not even this year, but at some point in time, more than likely, we're going to get what we want or we desire. And the second thing it taught me was just how much more our physical bodies can handle than we ever thought they could. Now, don't get me wrong. I think we all have a breaking point. I think that breaking point is so much further down the road because our brains, going back to the second point, our brains are telling us, oh, I don't like this. This hurts. This is uncomfortable. Stop doing that. And we listen to our brain and we quit and we give up long before we need to. Think of yourself as a marathon runner. We all heard the stories about marathon runners that hit the wall, that get to that point where I just can't go on. But if they continue to press forward, if they continue to move forward, eventually they get that second wind. Think of yourself like that. Keep moving forward, no matter how bad your struggle is. You can't do it by yourself. You've got to do it with something bigger than us, and that's God. But understand that God will provide you that second wind, and it's amazing what you can do once you get it.
So great. All right. So now somebody's thinking about, okay, what are my gifts and talents? Do you have any suggestions that would help them to identify those?
Yeah, I would tell you, what do you like? What are you interested in? What thing? I mean, if you told me to, go crunch a bunch of numbers, yeah, probably not my gifts and talent. Probably not something I would do. I'm much more, as you've probably figured out, talking or writing things. Those are my gifts and talents. But I think it goes back to what we were talking about in terms of looking at our lives in decades. In your 20s, do things. Do things that you think are interesting. Go to a chamber music concert. I really don't like chamber music. Okay, you learn something. I mean, do things that you find interesting. And I think by doing that, you will, okay, I don't like that. No, I'm good at this. Or I don't like that. I'm good at this. It's just a matter of doing things in your life. And the other thing I would suggest is ask people. Julie, you know me. Tell me what you think I'm good at. Tell me what you think my gifts are. It's amazing how a lot of times we get blinded by our own gifts and somebody else can say, oh, Terry, you're great at this, and this. Great. I never knew that. Thanks for telling me.
Exactly. Yeah. There's times when I wasn't so self-aware and people have said things to me and I was like, you're right. Sometimes they see things that we miss. And so that's a really important tool. Use the people in your life and ask them.
Yeah.
And even if you're not 20, you can still find time to explore and figure out what it is you're good at and what you enjoy. Yeah, like even me, I'm having a third wind here. Started off as a teacher, and then I was a mother, and then I had a brief stint in health, and now I'm doing mental health ministry. So, life doesn't have to be linear. God can use us in a variety of ways.
And life isn't linear, and you know that. I mean, nothing in life is linear. A lot of times we talk about purpose in the singular, like it's one thing that we're supposed to do. And at least in my life, and it certainly sounds like your life as well, that word is plural. Its purpose is. For me, I was an athlete. I was doing physical things when I was young. And then I got into law enforcement, and now my purpose has changed again. So don't feel that there's just that one thing. I think God a lot of times moves us in different directions based on what he needs us to do.
Exactly. I wholeheartedly agree because there are different seasons in our lives and they don't look the same at all. And for this time in my life, I'll be an empty nester. And so this phase is going to look very different and I'll be able to accomplish very different things than being homebound with families with a school schedule. So we need to be open minded to that. So, what would you say to somebody who's feeling like right now their life isn't quite going in the right direction? How can they begin to shift into a more positive direction that maybe is more aligned with God's current purpose for their life?
I would say number one, pray. I think that's incredibly important. I do it every day. Pray for guidance, pray for direction. Understand that there's a reason if you don't feel you're where you're supposed to be, it's kind of that old discussion about, when you ask for patience, does God give you patience or does he put you in a position where you can be patient? And so think about that, think about your life in that regard. Okay, I'm not where I'm supposed to be, but I'm here for a reason. And what is that reason, God? Ask. I mean, we've all been there. We've all felt like we were kind of the square peg in the round hole, and this isn't working out. And I will say this about my own life. When I graduated from college, my first two jobs were in business because it's what my dying father wanted me to do. It wasn't what I felt my purpose, my passion in life was. And one of the things that I am most proud of in my life is that I never let my dream die. I never let my purpose die. I was a hospital administrator. I was making good money. It wasn't really a very taxing job. And I gave that all up to become a 37-year-old rookie police officer because that's what I felt God wanted me to do. I felt God was leading me in that direction. So I know in this fast-paced, quick service society that we live in, we want everything and we want it now. You know what? I feel this, so give it to me, God. God doesn't work that way. God's on God's time. We're on our time. Totally different times. And understand that and just pray about what's going on. I don't really have any great tips to give you. Understand you're where you are for a reason. It's not happenstance. Understand that, try to figure that out, and just keep moving forward. Eventually you will get to where you want to go.
Well, yes, I agree with you. Sometimes we don't understand. And so I'll give you my own example. So after I was coming out of being a stay-at-home mom, I feel God calling me to become a group fitness instructor. And I was thinking, what? You want me to do what? Like, this doesn't make any sense to me. Until I realized that he was trying to get me to become comfortable speaking and leading and coaching in front of adults. And so that experience has led to where I am now because I needed that training in order to be here with people today, to be able to speak and have a podcast and ask and answer questions and not have that fear of being in front of the group. And so sometimes it might seem like a really strange interlude into what you think your life should be, but there is a reason for it. And so if you trust that leading, it will actually lead you somewhere and it will have a purpose. So, Terry, do you have a favorite Bible verse to encourage people today?
I do, and actually, I put this Bible verse in my first book that I wrote. I felt it was that important. One of the things that I did in my life, as I mentioned, is I was a SWAT hostage negotiator, and that had a lot to do with listening. Listening, not so much for what you were hearing, but for what we weren't hearing, and things like that. 1 Kings 19:11 through 13, and I'll read it, and I love it. It says, the Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. And I think that's so important, especially today. We are yelling and screaming at each other. So if God was trying to communicate with us, in that little whisper, would we be able to hear him? I'm not so sure we would. So, one of the things I learned as a hostage negotiator was the importance of empathy, of saying, okay, Julie, help me understand where you're coming from. Not necessarily agree. I may not agree with you at all, but help me to understand where you're coming from. If I can understand where you're coming from and you can understand where I'm coming from, we can have a discussion. By having a discussion, we might be able to hear that little whisper that God's talking to us.
So good. And often in my life, God does not shout. It is a whisper. And so often when I pray, it's God, keep telling me. If I don't hear, keep repeating. Maybe speak a little louder, because it is just a very still whisper and you really have to pay attention. But also, when you were talking about having empathy and having discussions, how great would that be? It would improve so many relationships that we have. Instead of trying to shout over, just trying to understand a little bit better the other person's perspective and where they're coming from. It might change a lot of things.
Absolutely.
Do you have any last words to share with people today? Anything else?
I'll give you one more story, if I may. One of the nurses who takes care of me asked me a couple months ago, she said, what was it like to have your foot amputated in 2018 and your leg amputated in 2020? And I told her it certainly hasn't been easy. I mean, I'm 6'8" and I'm a little older in life. So, learning to walk again, falling is not an option. You get hurt from this height and things like that. So what I told her was, cancer can take all my physical faculties. But cancer can't touch my mind, it can't touch my heart, and it can't touch my soul. And that's who I am. That's who you are, Julie. That's who everybody who's listening to us are. And we spend a tremendous amount of time working on this. We go to the gym, eat right, we get enough rest, we reduce stress. And I'm certainly not telling you not to do that. But I guess what I am suggesting is maybe every day, spend a little bit more time working on who you really are. Work on your heart, work on your mind, work on your soul. We know at some point, all of us, this body is going to die, to decay, and to go away. Your heart, your mind, and your soul, those things are eternal. Those things live on. Just don't think we spend nearly as much time working on them as we probably should.
You're so right, Terry. So many great nuggets of wisdom that you've shared with us. And so I was right. We have been very blessed by your obedience in writing that book. So if people were interested in getting a copy of your book, Sustainable Excellence, how could they get a hold of it, or how could they get a hold of you if they wanted to?
Yeah, Sustainable Excellence is available anywhere you can get a book online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, wherever you get your books, you can get Sustainable Excellence. You can also get it on my website, which is motivationalcheck.com. You can also leave me a message there if you'd like. And I really enjoy hearing from people and kind of having conversations about things like this. It's part of my purpose right now. So please feel free to reach out.
Yeah, isn't it satisfying when you hear back from people that you've been speaking to and they've been listening and you get that feedback? It really is satisfying. So thank you for being with us, Terry, and God bless your ministry. And if anybody wants to get a hold of his book, you can reach him on his website. I will put the link in the show notes, or Amazon, and that will be there as well. So thanks again, Terry. This was really wonderful.
Thank you, Julie. I enjoyed speaking with you today.
Thanks for joining me. I hope this episode has blessed you. If so, please subscribe, comment, and share. It's a great way to spread the love and keep good content rolling. As a reminder, this podcast is purely for informational and educational purposes only. Listening to content is not a replacement for medical or mental health care. Please make decisions with your personal care providers. Stay tuned for next week's episode. But if you want more content or free resources in the meantime, head over to FromBudToBloom.com. See you next time. Until then, live fully free in Christ.